This is the web service exercise in C#. I have the solution open already, and we've got the README file here. Starting off on line 15, we're going to start with our use case. So given the consumer interacts with the web API, when the consumer submits text to an endpoint, then that endpoint will return a response that reverses the text supplied. So we're doing our mirror functionality, just as we typically do in a lot of these exercises. This is through a web service today. So we'll start off with our test as we typically do. We'll make sure that the solution builds first thing. So we'll go up to the build and build solution menu up top. This will take just a few seconds. It may take a little longer on your computer. So we have a build succeeded, that's excellent. And then we'll go to our test explorer. I'm going to go and expand these and run the test. And we do get a failure, and that is expected. So we're seeing a response status code does not indicate success. So let's head to our test, see what's going on inside our test method, and then we'll start looking at implementing the code. Inside our test method, a single test here, we are creating a client emulator object. So there's a class called client emulator. Using that client emulator, we're posting JSON to a specific URL. So /API/mirror/reverse text, that's the destination URL. So this is not exactly a REST style service. We are passing in JSON data that includes a text property with the value of testing. So this is the JSON that we're sending over to our endpoint. We get the response back out. We want to make sure that it's a success code, and that's where our test is failing right now. We're getting a 500. Once that is successful, we are going to get the JSON back, and then from that JSON, we're going to go to the root element and get the reverse text property and make sure that the value is testing in reverse, which is the exact opposite of what we passed in. So our code is not working. What we need to do is we need to figure out where this endpoint lives inside the code. Where is the code that is mapping that endpoint, that URL, to the functionality we're looking for? So in the C# world in .NET, and you can do a find in file, so Control-Shift-F to find where that is. But in the C# world, we are going to look in the web project. So in our case, that's web app. And under that, there's a controllers folder. And this is going to have the classes that contain the mappings of the URLs. There's a single controller, so it's going to make it very easy to find in our case. That is a mirror controller. So looking at that class, we can see up at the top here is our route mapping. API/controller name/action. Controller and action are in square brackets, which means they're placeholders. The controller name is going to be the name of this class, mirror controller, minus the word controller. So this will map to API/mirror. /action is going to be the name of the method, the action method. So this method here on line 13 will map to API/mirror/reverse text. Looking back at our test, that's exactly the URL for which we're looking. So in here we can see that we have a not implemented exception. We need to get rid of that. We know we're going to need to return something. The reverse text model represents the data coming in. So we're using model binding as a part of what we're doing with Web API for C# and .NET. If I go to definition here, this is just an empty class. So a little internet search would be good here. In fact, go ahead and pause me and then unpause when you're ready. But do some research to try to figure out how would you do this. So the terms you're looking for are C#, Web API, model binding, post JSON example. It's a lot of words, but basically we're looking for an example of posting JSON to a C# Web API model using model binding. So that's the search for which we're looking. Once we find that, we're going to see that there's a few different ways to implement this, but effectively we need to create a property that maps to the data incoming. So let me switch back to the tests. We want a text property to map to that. So I'm going to create my text property here. We'll say public string text get set. I'm making this a dumb getter setter property, so it's going to create a field automatically. C# will map case insensitive, so it doesn't care about the case. So little text here will turn into either little text or big text. In C# we typically make our properties with a capital first letter, so I'm using capital text. But this name needs to match the incoming property name of the JSON. So we've got that mapping going well. Let's head back to our controller. So now that class, that object, is going to have the data we need. What we need to do is now reverse that text. So we'll say var reverse text equals from the model. We want to get the text. And now we're going to reverse this. So our standard way in C#, we're going to create a new string from text.reverse to array, and that'll reverse our text. From here, we need to return, and there is, so we're returning content. There's not really an easy way to do JSON, but there's, again, a few different ways. I'm going to do this a very, very simple way. We're going to create the JSON object that we want. So here's an empty JSON object we're returning. Let's head back to our test, and we'll remember we wanted a reverse text property whose value was the reverse text. So this name is important. I'm going to get reverse text. We're going to create a property inside here. And I have to escape my double quotes because we're inside a string. So we'll say reverse text property equals, and then some value. Now our value in this case is going to be the reverse text. And again, several ways to do this. I'm going to use string interpolation, which means I have to start my string with the $. Now that I have string interpolation, the other thing that I need to do is escape any curly braces. So I have to double up on my curly braces that I actually want in the code, and then the other curly braces are going to represent the variables or the values to which we're binding. So this will be my JSON. This turns out to be this JSON object, which is exactly for what we're looking. So we'll have a JSON object, reverse text property, whose value is whatever the reverse of the reverse text is, or the reverse of text is going to be. This looks right. Let's run our test, see if I've made any mistakes. All right, we do have an error. We've got G is an invalid start value for line number. Okay, so we are trying to parse our JSON, and it's not coming back correctly. Let's look and see what we've got going on. I do need to do double quotes because this is a string. So it's finding the word testing, but it's realizing that that's not inside double quotes, so it doesn't recognize it as a string. So let me try this again. We'll run our test. Now we have a pass. So that concludes the test part of this. Now to make sure that this actually runs, we can use this big HTTPS button up here, the play button, or I can hit F5. Either one are going to do the same thing. It's going to run. Now it's going to ask me about an SSL certificate, maybe a couple of times. I'm going to say yes to make sure to install the certificate, make sure it's available on my computer. This will run, and once this runs, we're going to open up a browser, and this is telling me about a certificate invalid, which installing the certificate should have fixed that. Let's see here. I'm trying to see if there's a way to trust this certificate. That's frustrating. Let me see if I can open this up in a different browser for a moment. Try Chrome. So this is localhost 7050. All right, so Chrome is not so complaining. I don't know what Microsoft did to Edge, but Chrome seems to be working. So this is an example testing page. So typically with the web service, you're not going to have a UI, you're not going to use a browser. But with Swagger, it's using something called OpenAI and wow, my mind just drew a blank. Open API. Sorry about that. So Open API to create some documentation for us. Looking at our post here, we can see we've got our URL and we've got this button, try it out. So we can actually experiment with this. So let's put in a string. We'll say this is Chad's awesome test. We'll hit the execute button here. This is going to pull back the response, and sure enough, here's our response, and we can see it reversed it. So we now have a web service that's ready to go. We've now tested it both with the test and manually through the UI, through a Swagger UI. That concludes the web service exercise in C#.